that's a lot of information, a lot of terminology, but that is again a quick overview of all the approvals you would require to pursue a change.
So, just to be clear, these are approvals required if we're changing scope of the project or the funding of the project. These are not approvals required to terminate the contract.
So these are not the approvals.
Correct.
I'm just thinking before I say that,
Right.
yes.
And so it is actually DOT's sole discretion whether or not to determine, whether or not they decide to terminate the contract, right?
That's correct.
Right, okay.
Well, the nuance
The
is,
replacement project.
you can't terminate a contract without changing the funding. So semantics to some extent, but
I don't know if it's semantics, Jim, because, you know, you argued in court successfully. It says that DOT has the right to terminate the comprehensive agreement at its convenience and at any time at its sole discretion, which to me says that you don't need approvals from anybody.
I cut you off, Roger. I don't mean
I cut you off too.
It's
That's not the
very,
ground rule.
it's very simple to look at terminating the contract, but it's the very next step. The what then? What is the replacement project? What's the source of funding in order to terminate the contract? So you have to look at that next step as well.
So what happens if we just, if tomorrow you just said, DOT just said, you know what, we found the money, we're going to compensate I-77 Mobility Partners and the contract is terminated. What happens to the facility out there?
You know, that's what this process is about.
Does it lie fallow then? Is it?
I mean, that's why DOT and Turnpike engage Mercator, and that's why we've engaged the Solar Advisory Group.
I think what you're asking is what is actually, like, if at the point of termination, what occurs? Essentially, does the work out here stop?
I'm actually going from a different perspective, and I think it's pretty important, and that is what you all argued in court successfully was the public interest is protected by the fact that we can terminate this contract in our sole discretion anytime we want. And that's the entire statement that you said. And what I'm hearing today is that's not the case. In fact, there's a whole list of things that has to happen if we in fact want to terminate this contract and do anything with it, right? So the point being, what was told in court, which is this is the ultimate safeguard, we'll just terminate this thing, and the impression was we'll do with it what we want, and the reality are two different things, is what I'm hearing.
Just, I know we don't want to relitigate it. I think the context of, in its sole and absolute discretion, is in the context of NCDOT relative to I-77 Mobility Partners. The question of whether the state agency, in executing it, has to be thoughtful about where does the funding come from, what are the consequences. Those don't impair its sole and absolute discretion to cancel a contract with I-77 Mobility Partners. But clearly, just like environmental, there are lots of different considerations that would go into a decision that would cancel, not the least of which is, does the agency in fact have the funding authority to proceed, which may have to come from the legislation.
Well, actually, Ned, the context in the legal briefs were, this is how we protect the public interest.
So let me just check in for a moment. I mean, I think this is obviously where this group is going to be wrestling over the next couple meetings. Let's see, related to Radha's section on approvals, if there are other things for clarification for him, and then we are going to turn back to the group for how you're interpreting and processing the information you've had between the first meeting, things that were emailed out, and things that you've heard today. So first, are there other questions for Radha on approvals?
A general question, and I understand that when we look at this, you know, you say 1.5 to 4 years, and you talk about change of construction, et cetera. So it really is kind of, if I'm not making substantial physical changes to the project, not adding lanes, not deducting lanes, not changing thickness of lanes, not adding over, exchanges, that type of thing, then that probably, because there's no new construction by and large, takes me more down to the shorter period of time, because then I'm dealing with the funding piece and what may trigger there. So you've kind of covered the waterfront from, you finish it and then decide what you want to do with it, and there will be some impact if you change what you're going to do with it. all the way to a 4-year possibility if you say, stop, tear it up, and start over again. So that's kind of the range that we're talking about. You've got to cover all the scenarios, not just, and I would say that the truth is somewhere in between the two of them, but you've covered all of them. Is that a fair enough assessment?
That's a fair assessment, but the clarification that you already mentioned is the funding.
Sure.
We don't know when the funding is available for whatever the changes happen.
Right.
But if
But
we're
again, the
talking,
funding piece has to do more when you can do it, not necessarily what you have to do in preparation of that change. So I got
so
that,
it's
thanks.
a fair summary.
Thank you.
That, what do?
Other questions?
So, yeah, I'm sure I'll have one.
Okay, let's,
So, may I, is it possible, and I'll ask the folks here, that, say that at the end of this exercise, we agree on a change in scope in the project, and whether or not it gets the funding out, we agree, here's the direction we would like to have at some point in the future. Is it then possible to work all of these approvals, if you will, in parallel? And say the change in scope requires terminating the contract. So you work all these approvals, you have the approvals done, and then you terminate the contract, and you turn over the project to whatever it is that's decided?
That's a good question. What I would say, and this is just off the cuff, but you know, we can put some additional thought into that. But what I would say is that yes, that there are certainly parts of the process that can be worked, you know, at the same time. They can be worked in parallel. You know, to what extent, I think it depends on the option that's being pursued. You know, obviously, any of the options will take time. I think that's one of the reasons the secretary, you know, was hoping to get some feedback from the group, you know, by April, was to give enough time to affect change before the project may open later this year. But yeah, I think there's always the opportunity to look for ways to run processes in parallel.
so for this question, again, we want to make sure there's been a lot of information given, but how are the members of the advisory group starting to think about it? So what you've heard so far, what's most important or significant, again, just to get at least a flavor from everyone, I'll ask our mayor from Mooresville in a moment to either offer a few words or pass. You can then see how other folks, I know this is your first meeting, so you didn't have the same benefit of the other folks for the meeting last month. But what's on your mind as you're hearing these kinds of things?
I guess my only question is if you move forward, it was go down that complete delete, but you don't want to, so you complete the project in its full entirety, and but you don't charge tolls. What I'm understanding as of today, no one would be able to use those lanes until all these other studies and assessments took place to determine air quality mitigation or any of those other factors. So those lanes would essentially stay closed. Could stay closed for as long as a year, 2 years, however long, where you could not use them. Is that?
Let's hold on that. Obviously, that's what's on your mind. It's saying the idea of complete, but does that mean we can't use them if they're not pulled in the same way that they were promised in terms of the first round? So we'll get at least some input from the experts that may be able to give some guidance. I'd like to hear from your other members first. Mr. Brady?
Basically the same question in generality, because there's a lot of moving pieces here that have to come together and come together in the right way, or we're standing there with a problem. So I kind of dovetail on what he's saying, asking or commenting, because that's where it takes it to that point.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Being Scott-Irish and ancestry, I'm notoriously tight in trying to figure out how this is going to be done economically and speedily. To me, it looks like I made the statement, it looks like we're going to try to decide who's going to collect the toll if we're going to get this done at the cheapest, fastest way. Now, and then I guess, to me, we're trapped in a lot of the sense of the word. We've done swum so far across that we can't turn around now because we're too close to the other bank. So no matter how bad the alligators are as we go to the other bank. And that's a little bit depressing. to say the least. So, I'm just sitting there playing this whole scenario through my mind, and our options keep getting more and more limited, in my opinion, what we can do.
Or what I've heard is the options as you understand them have certain ramifications that constrain how fast or how much change could be made within certain costs. Is that right?
Yeah, we talked about whether the DOT can find funding. We all know where the DOT finds funding at, and that's everybody in this room that pays taxes in the state of North Carolina. So what are we willing to put on the back of the taxpayers in North Carolina?
Thank you. Yes, sir.
I actually found the last 15 minutes to be the most interesting of the whole meeting. I guess the one question to piggyback kind of Mr. Austin, has there been any thought on where funding will come from? I mean, we're here to discuss options, right? And I've heard everything's on the table, but has there been any thought as to where the funding may come from?
Well, the DOT won't make that decision in isolation. As we've seen today, there are environmental and there are other stakeholders that will have part of the conversation. Some of the calculus you do have to weigh is if, let's say we did ponder a complete delete, you have to look at things like corridor caps, bonus payments that were given because of the business model. So the second and third order effects, none of the options are off the table. I can assure you the Secretary reinforced that with me. None of the options off the table. We just have to really ponder whether we want to live with the ramifications for the decisions that we do make.
It just seems like if we're going to be discussing the various options, it'd be helpful to know at least some generality of what we're talking about in terms of where the money may come from. I mean, are we talking using some bonus money? Are we talking, of course, taxes, which is we mentioned? It would certainly be helpful to know what we're saddling our constituents with.
So let me make sure I understand what you're after to what would help you provide the best advice is what are the possibilities and or ramifications? Again, you said specifically the complete and delete option, but there may be other options you want to consider. But what does the funding fill-in look like? Is that right?
Right. I mean, I don't want to. I think Mr. Bucket said last week. I don't want to judge an option based on funding alone. But at the same time, it certainly would be helpful to know what we're looking at. I mean, we're saddled with this. We're going to have to figure out something.
So you're from our next advisory group member, Ms. Cashin?
I guess when you continue on with that, it's DOT's decision under no options on the table, but then we have to follow a legislative process, do we not? Which, again, that really can't be answered sitting around this table. And I still struggle a little bit with the changes. It sounds to me like any change really invokes a litany of new approvals, a new approval process from all the various entities, whether it be a small change or a large change to some degree. So I'm not sure where we are on proposed changes and what that would look like, and if it would even be worth the while. If it's a small change and it's going to take 2 years, and then the funding mechanism, how do we think that plays out?
And that's a great question, and I think what we've talked about today, and my guess is what we'll talk about next week will be sort of all the considerations that have been taken into account when as you review the options. And I think the thought is as we get into later meetings, we'll have the opportunity to put those options up and then say, okay, weigh them against what the actual sort of cost estimates are for those and time estimates associated with those. So I think we'll get to that point where we do, and I think the group will get to weigh. That's why the group's here, is to weigh in on those options to look at, to challenge the assumptions going into it. So I think that will certainly come as part of this process. I think that and so when I think the Secretary says, when I hear him say no options off the table, I hear him take him at his word that no options off the table. We may have to find how we define how we get there, and that may be unclear in some cases, but I think we won't know that until we sort of continue to learn about what has to go into consideration here, and then can take that information and then put it up against the options that are on the table.
We don't know until we get there.
But I guess what I'm hearing is, in part, and let me check with the other folks as well, what's defined as any of you would consider a small change, but understanding, given what Radha and Phil and others have put forward, what does that mean in terms of change, delay or adjustment about when those lanes would be available and for what purpose? Am I at least on the right track there? Mr. Knox?
So what is most important, significant? Three things I learned today. There's a significant difference in termination compensation before completion and after completion. There's a number of approvals needed, but I think we can work those in parallel. DOT has the authority to terminate the contract in its sole discretion. And then I mentioned last meeting about, worried about being in the bureaucratic box, and I think we're a little bit in the bureaucratic box, but we'll report on that until the next meeting.
Thank you, Ms. Ivory.
I wrote down several things, and I understood from the beginning that we had 6 meetings. I really don't think that, I think we're gonna have to extend that. But I also heard earlier that this was brainstorming alternatives, and what I'd like to know, we have all these options, and I've heard a lot about termination. I do wanna know, and I would love for us to take each option one by one and do the pros and cons, and yes, the financial impact is important, but there's other factors that are important. And, there's things that, it says, what have you heard that is important? I did hear that there's no impact on the airspace, but then there were things that I heard today, that we asked questions about that I didn't get the answers to. And I think when you go through the pros and cons is how much to rebuild the lane if heavy trucks. And we talked about tax on the amount, and we talked about, I'm interested in the economic opportunities on and off the ramp. And, there were just several things, and I hope that we will have the opportunity to go through that. And I think by going through each option, because I heard a lot about termination, I think the train has left the track. Where do we go from here?
Okay, thank you. So, as you mentioned, your interest is being able to have a look at all the options and, as you put it, pros and cons for each one. And you raised, although again, it's not up to us to call, how the group would work, whether 6 meetings are sufficient. I know there's probably different views on that, about how long people could invest in this kind of process and still come up with something in a timely manner for the secretary.
Just to follow up on what you just said about examining each of the options, I think we focused a lot on complete and delete, but because you went through all the different changes, the scope changes and what have you, it might make sense to focus on that for the next meeting or choose one, but that one would encompass an awful lot of changes that would be in parts for the other changes. So if you address it all on the complete and delete, you probably then can parse it for pieces for less significant changes in scope and modifications. And I do think in looking at that, looking at the financial considerations, and in talking about the secretary saying no options off the table, I recognize that, but when we looked at the number of entities that are required for approvals, it is not just in the purview of the secretary. There are multiple entities that have to opine on whatever the, not only the recommendations are, but whatever the course of action might be.
Thank you. Ms. Scott.
Thank you. And I don't want to repeat what my colleagues here have said, but I certainly agree with the comments they had. I just wanted to say, as I was going through this today, where I felt uncomfortable. I felt uncomfortable with the comparisons well, the first one were comparisons of the speeds. And I guess, just my personal experience, I always tweet with my speedometer at 0, guess where I am. And, it's...
You tweet in your car, but your car's not moving.
No, it's definitely not. I always say we need food trucks and lawn chairs and a playground, because, so I kind of struggled with that. I also struggled with the comparisons of this road to other parts of highways in our region and also like in Raleigh, because I don't think, I would say, this area hasn't had any new roads in 35 years. And certainly Charlotte has had new roads in the last 35 years, as I live in southeast Charlotte, and so is Raleigh. So I kind of, and also this road here is Main Street. 45 is not Main Street. 77 in Charlotte is not Main Street. Highway 40 in Raleigh is not Main Street. Here it is. And that didn't seem to count for anything. Or the idea that this area, these people have been waiting for so long, and they were promised things in the past and they didn't get them. And I just think that needs to be taken into consideration as you rank projects. Because I just, again, I'm just thinking about the human side here and the people who live here. And also in this contract, the original contract, there was no economic impact, which was hard to believe. And here we go, we're still not talking about economic impact. And I guess I don't understand how North Carolina plans these big roads without any economic impact. So those are the things that I was struggling with as I was here, but I do agree with all my colleagues.
And just a clarification, make sure I'm understanding this, when you refer to this area, the northern Mecklenburg,
Right.
28 to 33.
Everything from on this map here.
Okay.
From Charlotte going north. But North Mecklenburg hasn't had any in 35 years, but their population has exploded like 500%. So I don't accept the comparison with Raleigh. I don't accept the comparison with 45. I don't accept the comparison with 77 or others. And we are on Main Street. This is totally different. And I think we should get a higher ranking.
Thank you, Mr. Puckett.
Yeah, a couple of things. One, similar to what Pat said, well, let me back up. I want to make sure that we, from my perspective, or I will just tell you my perspective, I'm looking at a 50-year project that has a number of major negative impacts on this region. So as we start to talk about the time period of making changes, it is considerably shorter than the 50 years that we will have if we do nothing. So if I have to delay a road for a year or two to fix it, for me, I'm happy because that's 48 years following that I don't have to deal with consequences. The scope of this had a very limited scope to decrease travel time for those willing to use the toll lane from Charlotte to Lake Norman. So having made that statement, I think what I'd like for us to look at going forward, very similar to what Ms. Ivy said, is we need to at least anecdotally or less anecdotally if we can, talk about the impact of not changing this project on the business community here. I would love to have Secretary of Commerce comment on the viability of this corridor north of it for future economic development in light manufacturing and major manufacturing, because we haven't talked about economic development impact. So as I've talked with people in Raleigh who have been part of recruiting businesses, I will tell you our area is by and large off the table for a number of those because of supply chain issues along the corridor that we're not talking about. So as we talk about the options, it is a financial option, but I also want us to talk about how those options physically play out to the people in here. That's why the chamber is involved with this, is to get a business perspective, not just an anecdotal traffic perspective. And the only data that I would probably want to have is what jumps out at me when we went back to our congestion level piece, and you notice that from exit 28 to 33, we are the worst of anybody, anywhere. I would like to know what changes in that 28 to 23 average speed projection over the next 50 years if we do nothing.
Too far to go back, sorry.
That's right. All it is the congestion levels. Okay. If we have projections of travel, of increased usage of the corridor, could someone tell me what the projection of decreased or increased travel times are? Because we have a project that admittedly does not impact congestion. We have a 50-year project that admittedly was not planned to decrease congestion, which tells me that at best, we will remain half the speed of any other comparable area. And at worst, if you assume there are going to be more people moving here, it will just get worse because there's no capacity built in there unless you want to use the toll lane, which is restrictive to people who can afford to use the toll lane, and assuming the toll lanes do not full up to their capacity of about 20% of general capacity, and that doesn't become an option. So I would like to see going forward kind of the projections of how this would impact travel times if this project goes unchanged.
Okay. We had reserved this last segment for the group to help us say what's going to be productive for the next meeting, which is in 8 days. So we want to make sure what we think would help you. I don't know, Peg, if you wanted to check anything here from the feedback so far before we go to the next one.
I think I may want to circle back to a couple of these in terms of information that I heard that would have to be provided.
So some of these
Yeah.
might fit within, again, what Mr. Puckett and others have specifically asked for. Go ahead.
I'm guessing that you may feel pretty saturated just with the information that you've heard today. It's a lot, but are trying to spread it out enough so that you're not completely get hit with all of it at once. And I say that in part to say, proposed topics for meeting 3, and this may get to your point, so that are to, and correct me, our SMH team on that, is we'll get to some of the questions that were asked about the operations, the revenue, that we recognize that some of the things you'd ask in the first meeting weren't addressed today.
Yeah, and I think the traffic operations really leads to what Mr. Puckett was saying as far as, what happens, 10 years down the line, 20 years down the line, if you're not adding general purpose lanes, only express lanes, what's the travel time, and so forth. So we're gonna try and get some information together to evaluate the options for you guys to consider. And then the revenue aspect, I know some of the options had impacts, whether it's a frequent user fee or HOV using it longer. What kind of impact would they have on the revenue? Because that could potentially be some type of compensation to the concessionaire, and whether that's something to consider. So we wanted to kind of get some of that information out for the group to look at.
And my question to that is, it looks to me as though we're kind of getting to the end faster than, we keep talking about revenue impacts. I would like for us to have some discussion of the options, some discussion of what they are, and forget the cost. We have to circle back to the cost, because at some point, if I spend, we got about 8 of them that were up there. My guess is about 5 to 6 of them are probably going to become irrelevant pretty quickly. So I may not need to spend a lot of time talking about the revenue side of that, but at least kind of go into what those options would look like. The ones that you listed, from do nothing to complete and delete, kind of what that would look like, and how you, and specifically, because you had, when we talked about the mid-level change of scope, and was it a toll road or an express lane or whatever, we didn't really talk about what would an express lane look like versus a toll lane, what would reduce toll lanes and those types of things. So just kind of I think we need to kind of have a better definition of what those options look like. Because right now we have kind of a broad, it would be something. What would the something be? And then circle back around, because we may find that we find 3 or 4 of those, you go, well, that didn't going to work at all. So we don't need to waste time on that as far as filling in data behind that. So I'd love to have just kind of could we walk through the options, what they would look like.
Well, again, we could go back to the options. So I think what, go ahead, but I think at least 2 members, they may want to have more depth on particular options sooner, although I see this as a challenge perhaps without getting the same kind of background you just got on the other topics related to traffic and revenue impact. So I think that's the challenge we face of what to give you when for what level of discussion. So let me see what
Well,
the,
I would say, I think with an operational look at things, that kind of helps understand what those scopes are and where problem areas or areas that you may want to concentrate on would be. But I can appreciate really wanting to get into the details of exactly what that scope change would be.
And literally, how you use the road, and how you use it, how that would impact different segments of if it's toll, if it's less than toll, if it's a mix of toll, if it's partial toll, you know, whatever you see as those options, kind of how that works, to get some idea of whether it works or not.
So with a number of the things up here in terms of hearing more of the pros and cons, particularly around the operations of the different options, hearing the economic development impact and supply chain issues, hearing about the projection of the increase or decrease travel times, given that the project wasn't specifically designed to decrease congestion. Again, I'm going to look at three of you to say, is this, some of this would be covered next time, much of it, is this?
Well, look, I think we need to do this. I think, but I hate to put them on the spot and say,
Yeah.
how much information can you generate in 7 days? But what I would say is anything that's on the list, just as we did last time, I think anything that was asked for, like the travel time information, we were grabbing information as fast as we could to get it to you, and we'll continue to do that. So we will move as fast as we can to answer all the questions that are put forward. Certainly if we can get this information ahead of time, we'll share with you before the meeting, or at the next meeting.
and here's the one thing that I've heard, whether it can be done in the next meeting or not, I don't know, picking up with Ms. Ivory, is maybe take one of the quote-unquote lower impact options and be able to show pros and cons and sort of think through that as you think of, on one end, again, Mr. Puckett, you sort of gave the continuum of the idea. This is not the one that anyone's advocating for at the moment,
Right.
but here, sort of at one end,
Yep.
maybe whether it's terminate now or complete and delete or something at the other end. Again, several voices talked about the complete and delete thing. It seems that's of an interest. So maybe some first cut on two of the options just to get some variation. Again, I'm not sure that's possible, but it sounds like that's what at least some folks are interested in sooner rather than later.
May not be possible for the next meeting, but could certainly be possible for, that's one way to cut it. Okay, yeah, that
Maybe
illustration.
through email, we need, as a group, each individual needs to rank these different options, one being the most important, and what is it, 8 of them? 7, I can't remember, 8, 7, whatever it is.
through F.
Yeah, A through F, we'll worry about the numerical. Anyway, but rank them, and sort of, that would, to me, would help sort of get an idea of how this group feels to every different option.
And I think, go ahead.
My problem is I can't rank it because I don't know what it means.
That's.
In the first place, I'm going to suggest that there are people at this table that literally do not know what the current project looks like, where you can get on, where you can get off, etc. I mean, there's a number of us who've been dealing with it for a number of years and are pretty intent with it, but there are also a number of people who probably could not tell you how the toll system as it sits here today, as designed, is even going to work. So I think we probably need to have some explanation of what it is today, literally how you use it, where you get on it, where you get off it, how the toll is structured, how many people can use the toll lane, be the contract. So I think we probably need to have a pretty good overview of what it is today if we do nothing, so you have an idea of what it is today if you do nothing. And then we start to walk that back along the way as to how that would change all the way down to complete and delete, which is complete it and open it wide open, and we all know how that works. Everybody uses the lanes. But what does in between those two look like? But I think we make a mistake if we assume that everybody knows where we are. I don't know that that's true.
Well, I think there's some pretty set agendas already, and to just get a feel of if it comes back and complete and delete is 12 to 2, Well, that gives us an idea that there's a whole lot of people don't give a crap about the options.
Hey, one thing that the secretary asked me to remind everyone of this, let's not be constrained to the options that Makeda report outlined. If you do have an idea that you feel worthy, if you don't want to articulate it here, if you want to email it to us, certainly email that idea to us. One item I wanted to circle back on before we dismiss, you guys asked last time, and I wasn't here, I'm not sure exactly the context about the construction quality out there. We have a number of things in place. This comprehensive agreement is backed by the NCDOT standards and specifications in the construction manual. Also, it's bounded by the minimum construction sampling and testing guidelines. The actual concessionaire here, they have 2 apparatuses in place. They have a management plan that oversees the quality control of their construction. They actually have a testing firm. Right now they have about 31 employees, and they're performing higher than the state or the federal frequency limits. The NCDOT has backstopped that with a quality assurance program, and we currently have 13 employees overseeing that as well. In addition, I-77 Mobility Partners, the private equity investors, have a firm as well that's overseeing their interest. So there's 3 entities actually out there looking at the construction quality. Should you see something that deserves our attention, we welcome that feedback. That's part of my charge in being the deputy division engineer, to have an objective set of eyes and take your feedback, would it be quality or safety. So do at any moment, and I'll make sure you all get my contact information, bring that to my attention. The other item was lighting. Construction does have some inconveniences. On this corridor, we do have interchange lighting, particularly in the northern sections. In the south, from I-277 to about the Cindy Lane area, we have roadway lighting along the corridor. Quite a bit of that is out right now because of the construction interference. All of that will be restored. We're actually doing upgrades to this corridor, as we are with the rest of our interstates, and installing LED lighting around the state. So trying to realize some cost savings there. A little bit of snafus right now, some things really above my knowledge level. Because of this new LED lighting and the systems required to run it, there's some interference occurring with tolling technology. So I think we have to work that out in our Raleigh area as well. Because frequencies, again, that's way above my skis. Can't handle that. But rest assured, this corridor will be lit better than it was lit before. And we will try to get those devices back online as soon as possible.
Thank you, I'm happy to hear that, because I've been one that has really complained about that, because like from exit 28 to uptown, there's like 118 lights that have been out, and they've been out for like 2 years. And even farther south, going into Charlotte, the light, Brookshire is completely, I need flashlight, to get home. But there's even like in 77 going south, like 25 in a row, the lights are out. And some of the lights are on during the day, because I've taken pictures of lights on during the day. But it is dangerous for our citizens, and I know I'm always afraid when I go home, because I live so far away when I'm leaving here at night. But it's been out for more than 2 years, so it could even be close to 3. So I'm really glad to hear you talking about it, and we will look forward to that for safety. Thank you.
And as we did in the first meeting, we just want to close with a quick evaluation, what went well, what needs improvement. We will use this to continue to modify and these agendas for these meetings and try to get the best we can to meet your needs. So anything on either of those columns would be helpful to hear, including whether or not it was useful to have pre-meeting time for networking. That was one of the things we had for this meeting, but we can see whether or not that was.
I would like to start off by saying I'm glad it's open, and the media is here, and we have citizens here, and because I was one who brought that up for the last meeting. So, and I wish we had a bigger place, but I'm grateful to the chamber, the Lake County Chamber, for hosting us here.
we could use a bigger place, I've offered Cornelius Town Hall.
No news is good news.
Yeah, yes, and that, then also put the ending on time, that's one of our things too. All right, so nothing else, but people will, yeah, move to adjourn, people will, staff, I think, will be able to hang around for a few minutes, yes, so if anybody does have remaining questions, thoughts,